Something's creeping, it's right outside. So come on in, and don't be shy. We've got ghosts and UFOs. Brace yourself, get ready for the show. Don't be afraid of the dark. The fun's about to start. Nightmares, our tales will inspire. Oh, tonight at the Scaredy Campfire. Have you heard tell of a demon next door? Or maybe a cryptid on the lake shore? There's nothing too strange for us here. So if you're ready, stamp out your fear. Don't be afraid of the dark. The fun's about to start. Nightmares, our tales will inspire. Tonight at the Scaredy Campfire. Whoa, whoa.
You are listening to the Scaredy Campfire. Thank you for tuning in to episode 2. We want to give a great big thank you to all those who let us use their stories for tonight's show. Our first story comes from Lil Independent 6769 on Reddit. I used to work at a boutique in Mega Mall, and my shift was in the morning. Before the mall opened, we had to be inside by 9:30 a.m. to prepare and clean the boutique. The store I worked at was a bit dim inside if you looked at it from the outside. When I entered the store, I headed straight to the fitting room because that's where the light switches were. I was carrying a chain with me, the lock for the store's door. Just as I was about to turn on the lights, I felt someone tug at the chain that I was holding. When I turned around, I saw a child standing in front of me, probably around 6 to 10 years old. His face was blank and he wasn't wearing a shirt. He was just in shorts and his body was dirty, as if it was covered in some black grime. It's true what others say. When you see these kinds of entities, you really can't make out their faces. We stared at each other for a few seconds, and then he disappeared when I blinked. This is one of those experiences that still makes my hair stand on end whenever I think about it. Our second story comes from Mediocre Finish 1218 on Reddit. I have a loft bed in my room, and whenever my boyfriend stays over, we just set up a bed on the floor where we sleep. One time he woke me up around 3 to 4 a.m., saying, "Babe, can you turn on the light? I feel like someone's peeking from above the loft bed." Now, I'm not easily scared, so I just told him, "There's nothing there, just go back to sleep." When we woke up in the morning, I asked him why he felt like someone was peeking from the loft bed. He said he woke up because his phone lit up from a notification, and when he looked up at the loft bed, he saw a shadow that suddenly disappeared, and a white figure that looked like a smiling woman. In short, he saw 2 figures peeking out at us while we were sleeping. Our third story comes from GrayF272 on Reddit. When I woke up, there was a red demon on the ceiling, with glaring eyes and long horns, as if it was trying to take me. I closed my eyes again and covered myself with a pillow. Suddenly, a cold wind blew, and then I started sweating profusely. I didn't look at the ceiling, but it was still there in my peripheral view. It disappeared when the sun rose. Our fourth story comes from LagTim3 on Reddit. I've had a handful of paranormal experiences in my life that can all be chalked up to anxiety, an overactive imagination, or being high, except for one. It was pretty minor, but I still haven't been able to explain it, no matter how many times I rack my brain. Back when I was still a child, and still a Christian, specifically of the evangelical flavor, I'd often theorize about things I read in the Bible as if they were any of the other stories that I like to do that with. My church mates and pastor were not fans of my hot Christian lore takes, if you were wondering. One notion that I'd taken to was the idea that demons scare people because that's what gives them power to escalate and do everything else. So the few times that I found myself in a situation that I decided might be paranormal, my approach was to firmly and pointedly ignore it. My childhood best friend lived in a house that she had some strange experiences in, as did her dad. According to her, she often heard footsteps and felt like she was being watched. Things went missing and then showed up in odd places. Random chills in the air, that sort of thing. Pretty stereotypical ghost tropes. I did hear the footsteps once, but that could have just been house sounds. I definitely experienced the random chills and the sudden distinct feeling of being watched and loomed over, but that could have just been anxiety. You know how fear can be contagious around other people, especially if you're already predisposed to believe in ghosts and demons. I definitely had nightmares more often in that house, but that could have just been subconscious fears. I heard children laughing once, but I do have an overactive imagination and have had audio hallucinations more than a handful of times. The one thing that I could never explain was this. I'd been coming over to this house since age 8, and I was now 18. I was staying with my friend and her dad for a few months. I wanted to try living somewhere that wasn't with my parents for a while, and I was alone in the house at the time. I was on my computer and heard some sort of odd banging. Immediately after, I got that being loomed over feeling, that being stared at feeling, and oddly enough, I got the distinct notion that something was very angry. I responded by cranking my computer volume all the way up, on headphones of course, and putting on an Astiv movie compilation. As someone who did a lot of maladaptive daydreaming, I had already gotten used to ignoring scary things I didn't like, and was able to pretty quickly remove my mind from the situation. Except, that angry feeling never went away. I didn't dwell on it, but it was still present. And as I refused to acknowledge it, I distinctly remembered feeling that anger swell. And then, completely alone in the house, a penny was pitched at the back of my head hard enough that it left a tiny goose egg afterward. You'd think that would freak me out, and I did startle, of course, but immediately after, I actually burst out laughing. I think I said something along the lines of, "Paranormal activity really hyped you guys up, didn't it?" and then promptly returned to watching stickmen vomit rainbows. The feeling dissipated. I remember noticing sometime later that I never got any weird feelings in that house anymore, unless I was around my friend. I'm still dubious about the paranormal. I'd be outright dismissive if it wasn't for that stupid penny. To this day, it still bothers me deeply, and I have no other way to explain it. Our fifth story comes from Nitro Ninja Gamer on Reddit. When I was a kid, we lived in a small, isolated house on the edge of a half-developed neighborhood. There were only about 6 houses on our block, and ours was the last one before many overgrown weeds and empty land stretch out into the dark. At night, the area was deserted, and you'd rarely see anyone ever step outside. I lived there from the ages of 7 to 13, and looking back, it felt like I was trapped inside one of those disturbing, uncanny horror films where reality always just seems a little bit off. And before I dive into the incidents, it's worth mentioning that our life in that house was filled with a sense of suffocating dread. Financially, we struggled a lot during those years, drowning in debt. Strangely enough, things turned around for us as soon as we moved out. Family fights erupted daily, and I remembered feeling terrified constantly. I remember not going too far into any room so that if anything jumps out, I could run through the door easily. I'm not sure why I did that, to be honest. Here are some of the events that made me believe something was haunting us. Incident 1, the unseen watcher. I remember staying home from school one day because I was sick. I was curled up on the couch, watching Barney and Friends, trying to distract myself from the eerie feeling of that house. At some point, I felt someone standing beside me. I assumed it was my mom joining me to watch the show, so I didn't think much of it. A few minutes passed, and I casually asked her something. There was no response. I asked her one more time, and there was no response again. I turned to find no one there. And that's when it hit me. My mom wasn't even home. She had left for work hours ago, and I was completely alone in that house. This freaked me out, and I opened the front door and sat on the porch until my parents came home because it felt so real. It felt like someone was actually there. Incident 2, the yellow ball and the swarm. This incident happened to my sister, but I'll explain it from my point of view. We used to all sleep in the same room since our house only had one bedroom, and me and my sister would usually sleep in between my parents just to feel safe. One night, my sister was studying for her test in the living room, and, around 12:30 a.m., I was starting to fall asleep when suddenly my sister burst through the door running and jumped onto the bed, scared and crying. After calming her down, she told us what had happened. She was in the living room studying for that test when, out of nowhere, a yellow ball with a smiley face on it rolled to the hallway from the other room, and as it came to a stop, dozens of cockroaches scurried out from the same room, like they do when they hear humans walking. Our house had a serious cockroach problem. The floors practically came alive with them at night. She said a heavy sense of dread washed over her as she stared into the dark hallway, and then she saw it. A shadowy figure emerging from the darkness, moving in a way that made her feel cold all over. She told us that she felt stuck for a second, and then froze in fear, before running to the bedroom. Incident 3. The disappearing glasses. One morning, my dad couldn't find his glasses. He had recently undergone cataract surgery, so they were essential. The whole family spent what felt like hours scouring every inch of the house. We checked his shelf multiple times, which is where he usually kept them, but they were nowhere to be found. We left for school, defeated and convinced that his glasses were gone for good. But later that evening, as we were sitting around, my dad suddenly called out to my mom, sounding almost angry. We rushed over to find the glasses sitting right there on the shelf, exactly where we had checked over and over again. My dad thought we were playing a prank on him, but we weren't. There was no explanation for how they could have reappeared like that, and it wasn't him pranking us either, because he was so mad that day. Incident 4. The mysterious fortune teller. Okay, so this one is actually scary, so strap in. How would you feel if a random creepy-looking guy stood in front of your house and started chanting? Well, in South Indian culture, there's a figure known as the Kudugupu Karan. I've not heard much about them, but they are like devotees of God who roam the streets and randomly tell fortunes to people, but most people avoid him, fearing that his predictions might bring misfortune. My first encounter with one of them was when I was young. I remember hearing a man singing in some kind of religious song near our doorstep, like literally a few meters away from our door, and I went to check on it, but my mom quickly grabbed me and from the back told me to be silent and not to make any sound. We pretended like there was nobody home, and eventually he just went away. I was so confused, and I asked my mom who he was, but she didn't explain it, just brushed it off. Years later, as the strange happenings in our house grew more intense, a similar figure began appearing near our house when my dad was home alone. For several days, the man stood near our door, chanting and seemingly delivering cryptic messages at night. Finally, my dad confronted him, telling him to stay away. I never saw the man again after that, but I couldn't shake the feeling that his presence was somehow connected to all the disturbances. Incident 5. The chanting yogi. My sister also had some reoccurring nightmares while we lived there. She remembers one in particular that terrified her. She would wake up to a vivid vision of a figure, like a yogi or a mystic, sitting on her chest, chanting in an unknown language. She could feel his weight pressing down on her, making it almost impossible to breathe. This vision plagued her until we left that house for good. When we finally moved out of that place, and to our relief, the strange experiences almost entirely stopped. Our financial situation improved, the family conflicts became less frequent, and that constant, creeping fear seemed to lift. I can't explain what was happening in that house, but living there always felt like I was stuck in a disturbing horror film, one that I desperately wanted to escape. Our 6th story comes from Benevolent Mountain 3 on Reddit. This experience has been with me for over 30 years, and I'm here just to get other people's perspectives on it. I've shared it with a couple of people before because it sounds so strange. I was about 13 and playing basketball in my driveway with my brothers and a few of their friends. The ball rolled behind one of the cars, so I ran to go fetch it. On the other side of the car, I saw a UFO hovering just above the road. I was brought up into the UFO, and there were 3 alien-like beings there. Everything looked sterile, shiny, and was made out of smooth metal. I was then on an operating table, and there was a machine above my stomach area. The machine had a needle-like thing that came down from it, and it went right into my stomach. It did not hurt, but felt like pressure, and I did not want it to happen. But I was not able to move. This lasted a long time, I think. I was then in the UFO while the beings looked at me and communicated with one another. They did not speak or communicate with me. And the next thing I know, I was holding the basketball in my driveway and ran around the cars to my brothers. I was a little shocked and confused when my brothers were calling for me to grab the ball and come. I felt like I was gone for hours, but to them it must have been just a minute or two. I don't really know, and I've never asked them. I just wondered how they didn't notice I was gone for so long. I didn't say anything to them and just went on playing basketball. So do you think this was some kind of abduction or just my imagination running wild? Our 7th story comes from G Squatch55 on Reddit. Earlier this year in March, I was in my work van driving from Warninglid to Littlehampton, West Sussex, to start my deliveries. It was early morning, around 5 a.m., still pitch black, but the weather was clear. I was driving southbound on the A24 and had just passed by the southern tip of the village Ashington, soon to be approaching the Storrington roundabout. On my left-hand side, there's a section of grass that runs for a few hundred feet and is about 6 foot wide or so before it becomes a huge thicket of brambles. I saw a creature that I could only describe as a cardboard box color. It was about 4 foot tall, but down on its haunches to where its heels were touching its butt, and it was facing diagonally away from me in the base of the bushes, so I saw its back and left side of its body more than anything else. Its spine was showing, and also its ribs, but not to the extreme, and it had small round ears that were in the location of a human's, but shaped in a similar way as to what black bears are. It had a tail that rose up into a subtle S shape, was very skinny, and seemed to be hairless, like the rest of the animal. The face, from what I could see, had a muzzle, but not extremely pronounced, and it seemed to be tracking something in the grass. My guess would be some kind of rodent. Its head movements were very digital and all over the place, and it jumped like how a fox would when pouncing, but doing so I saw the soles of its feet, which I remember extremely clearly looked exactly like ours. But given the hours I'm awake and the fact that I'm a proper country boy, I see multiple foxes on a daily, and this was as far from a fox as a monkey is. It was nothing like I'd ever seen before in person, on the telly, internet, or in the books. The duration of this whole thing lasted about 5 seconds, and as soon as I saw it, I had shivers all over my body. I couldn't believe my eyes. I got on the roundabout probably 30 seconds later and doubled back on myself to get back to that same road again in hopes that I could get a second glimpse, but I wasn't lucky. The thing about it all that was almost stranger than the sighting itself was that I had such a strong feeling of shame that came over me. I felt so shameful in seeing it, and I have no idea why. I remember being in tears because of it, and I don't fully understand why, but I felt like I had no business seeing it, as if I had a regular job that never required me to be up so early, and I never would have. I still have no idea what it was. Our 8th story comes from Dull and Hypothetical on Reddit. I've lived in this house for about 8 years now. My family bought it. We're in a small city in Ontario, Canada. The house is just a typical house, built in the 70s. The first day we moved in, I remember feeling a strange vibe in the house. Didn't really put much thought into it, though. When we toured the house before buying it, I never got any strange vibes at all. A few months in, and we started experiencing strange, unexplainable things. Papers moving to other spots in the house when nobody is home. My grandmother died. Her death certificate was moved to a completely different table one day while we were out. It's only the 2 of us that lived there, and it wasn't either of us that moved it. We'd both frequently see shadows moving in the corners of our eyes. If we were cooking in the kitchen, it would feel as if you're being watched, enough to make you turn around and look. Footsteps. The usual haunted house things. About 2 years in, my father got up in the night and went downstairs. His room is right across from mine, and I can see straight into the doorway from my bed. I saw a white, clouded figure walk into his room, and suddenly the door slammed shut. I yelled at him for slamming the door. A minute later, my dad walked up the stairs and asked me why I shut his door and why I was yelling at him. I explained to him that I had just watched someone walk into his room and slam the door. It wasn't me. I thought it was him that just walked into the room. Not to mention, my dad's door is on a weird angle, so it's not possible for the door to be blown shut. The door won't even stay halfway open without putting a sock in front of it. It just falls open and sits against the wall. You have to physically close the door for it to close. 4 years in, and I was sleeping one night and randomly woke up. I looked at the foot of the bed and saw a crystal clear image of a face staring at me. It was an old man, and he was very blue-colored. I freaked out and went under the covers to fall back asleep. About 6 years in, we find out from a neighbor that one of the past owners passed away in that house from a heart attack. He was an older man, so this must have been who I saw. We also randomly found out that one of my cousins was friends with the last owner's children and spent a lot of time in that house. And before I ever mentioned anything to her about the experiences we had in that house, she asked if we knew that it was haunted. I didn't get any stories from her about what the old owners experienced in the houses, but they also knew that it was haunted. It wasn't just us. We've also seen some things that aren't explainable by the old man passing away in that house. We've seen shadow figures and non-human figures. We kind of describe them as alien-like. Besides the creepy haunted vibes we get and the strange shadow figures we've seen, the old man ghost doesn't present to me as being harmful. He's just here. He checks in on things. He wanders around. There's a few rooms in particular that always have a strange energy. One is the basement, and the other is this sitting room that we have. The basement is just one large room. It's not a typical creepy basement. It's a finished basement. My cat is also extremely attached to the basement. It's empty, and there's nothing down there that should draw her to it, but there's been times where we've seen her batting the air as if something is playing with her, but nothing's there. We've tried renting out the basement to tenants, but it never works out. All of them leave after a few months. My sister once lived down there for a few months and had some very, very bizarre experiences that I don't want to add to this post because it's already getting quite lengthy. But feel free to DM me if you want those stories. Anyone that goes down there admits that there's a strange vibe. I want to make this basement into my bedroom, but I'm afraid. All of the strange shadow figures and the non-human entities that we've seen down there have been in the basement. Usually while we're doing laundry we've seen them, or the past tenants have seen them. I just wonder exactly what that is. I'm comfortable having the old man ghost with us, but the non-human entities? That's what scares me. Our 9th story comes from Underwear666 on Reddit. The home I currently live in is haunted. My boyfriend and his family have always lived in this house. 3.5 generations. One of the spirits here likes me, enough that it will turn on the lights while I'm asleep. We have those little battery-operated LED lights in the shape of a cactus. We have 3 different ones. Once in a while, we will change the batteries, but we always forget to turn them off and they'll be drained after a week. We've had them all turn on in the middle of the night, 8 months later, glowing brighter than they ever should. I had one turn on while I was directly next to it while getting up to go to work. As I passed by the shelf within inches of my face, it turns on. In the basement, one night alone watching movies, I almost fell asleep. We have 2 shop lights that are each plugged into a special adapter so they can be turned on and off with our phones. My boyfriend is the only one with access, and he has to be on our Wi-Fi to do it. There is a button that you can turn them physically on and off with, though, and it makes a very distinct sound. I was almost asleep, and then I heard the button. I'm internally freaking out. I say to myself, if I open my eyes and the light is on, I'm losing my shit. It was on. There was nobody else in the basement. Nobody but him or I even come down here, and he was 45 minutes away. I figured maybe he was messing with me, and when he got home I asked him about it. He was not messing with me. He was nowhere near our town, let alone the Wi-Fi. Plus, I heard the button physically be pressed. I think it was just my friend keeping a watchful eye where I sleep. He only turns on the lights when I'm about to go in our room. Never for my boyfriend, except for once. My boyfriend promptly messaged me to come to bed. He was nervous when I got to our room, and I had a chuckle about it. I thought, maybe the old man likes you and he wants to protect you. This house has other energy and vibes to it, and while having an invisible friend that I've never met is sometimes unsettling, it's never tried to harm me, and quite the opposite, seems to not want to leave me in the dark. It has some kind of connection to me, and I may never understand why, but hopefully it gives them some peace to be able to check in on me and turn on my nightlights. I joke that my boyfriend is just jealous that he's lived here his whole life and the ghost has never turned on nightlights for him. Maybe you remind the old man of someone or something, and he stays near to you for reasons of his own. Just say thank you every once in a while. Our 10th story comes from Saving Concert 970 on Reddit. I woke up at like 5:30 a.m. to a sound which sounded like one of my dogs crying. I'm 100% sure I knew which dog it was because it's like 2 years old and still sounds like a puppy, so it's different from all the rest. The crying was not distant at all, and it sounded like it was right outside my door. I turned the lights on in my room and then the whole upstairs of the house. I quickly started opening doors and looking for the dog. After searching upstairs, I went downstairs. She was nowhere to be seen downstairs, and only my bigger dog and my older dog were in a room together. Door closed because Mom wasn't home. I call my mom and ask her where the third dog is, and she said it was with her. I told her about the sounds that I'd been hearing, and she said it must have been one of the other dogs. I told her that I 100% knew the difference between the dog barks and cries, and she thought that I'm silly. I'm wondering what I've encountered because I believe it was something that really wanted to lure me out. I also want to add that before I called my mom, I thought something fell on the dog somewhere in the rooms because of the sound that it was making. But no, that dog wasn't even home. I'm writing this 20 minutes later, and I'm unsure of what I've encountered. Our 11th story comes from Smart for a Rat on Reddit. I'm going to try to give as much context as I can for these two really strange events. On July 2nd, my dog died. I loved her dearly, and she meant the world to me. She was abnormally intelligent for a dog, the smartest one I had ever seen or even heard of. Her ability to pick up and learn things, then communicate with me, and so on was just phenomenal. My wife, knowing that I was heartbroken, of course, got me a puppy the very same day. Not something that I recommend. Not something that I even wanted. But she knew how much my dog meant to me and wanted to give me something else to hold on and latch onto, I guess. The first encounter was about a month later. I was sitting in my study at my computer with my new puppy sleeping in my lap when I got a text from my wife. She said, "Come get your puppy." I was confused what she meant, and I picked up my puppy and went in the bedroom where she was. She was taking a nap, and all of our other dogs were asleep on the bed with her, and the only one that was not present was my puppy, which I obviously had with me. I told her I had the puppy with me the entire time. It had been asleep in my lap for the past hour, and he didn't know how to use the doggy doors yet anyway. She looked a little unsettled by this and told me that she was woken up by the doggy door, the one that leads outside, flapped open, and something came in and barked a couple of times and then left. All the other dogs were on the bed with her, except my puppy, so she assumed that it was him. But I had him with me the whole time. I suggested that maybe she just dreamed it since she was already asleep and just woke up as it happened, but she insists that the other dogs woke up too and were all looking at the doggy door. I then thought that maybe it was some other dog. Two of the dogs that we have are strays that people just dumped on the side of the road near our home, so the idea of a random dog wandering up in our yard is not unheard of. So I went outside and thoroughly searched the property. My property is fenced, but it is possible with enough determination to squeeze under it, and we've had the occasional turtle get in the back fence because of this, as well as some stray cats and even a dog once, but they never seem to find their way out and get stuck inside. Anyway, I figured if anything was out there, I would have found it, but I didn't. There's nothing. I even looked at the spots on the fence that can be pushed under, and there were no signs that something had even pushed under there. None of the dirt was disturbed. I kind of shrugged it off and concluded that she must have dreamed it and kind of wrote it off my mind. The second encounter was about a week ago. I was again sitting in my study at my computer. This time I had two dogs in my lap. One of our stray dogs is really obsessed with the other one, and she follows him around everywhere he goes and wants to sleep beside him all the time. I had him in my lap with my puppy, but not her. And in those situations where he is with me and she isn't, it's not unusual for her to come through one of the various doggy doors in the room to come find him so that she can go lay beside him and sleep. So anyway, on this particular night, I heard the doggy door flap open and something walking across its threshold. I can't actually see it where I'm sitting because of the angle of my chair, but I just assumed that it was the female stray dog looking for the male stray dog, because that happens often. And while I wasn't looking, I was listening, because I was waiting for the doggy door that leads to the outside to flap open as she leaves. But I didn't hear any of the telltale footsteps of claws tapping on the floor, and I never heard the doggy door open again, so I called out for her, but got no response. And then I got out of my chair and just looked around, and she wasn't in the room. Again, I just assumed that maybe she didn't come in after all and just poked her head through the flap to look around and smell and see if the other stray was in here. This also wouldn't be too unusual for her. So assuming that, I went out of the room to just go look for her. Now, just to give some context, our house has two doggy doors that lead to the outside yard, but the only interior doggy doors we have are in the study where I was. Both of those are smaller than the exterior ones, and I got them specifically for my dog that had died. They were much smaller than the exterior ones, and the point was so that she could have free rein to go wherever she wanted, but no one else could. The female stray was the only other dog small enough to use those doggy doors. What this means is, if she had been in the greater part of the house, she would be trapped there, because the only way to leave would have been to go through the study, then through the exterior doggy door to the yard, then through the exterior doggy door into our bedroom. So I searched the house, but again, nothing. No dog. Because the two interior doggy doors are of a different design than the exterior one, they have distinctly different sounds they make when they open and slam closed. I heard that door open and close just 3 feet from me, when there was no dog there and no dog that could have been there. My wife heard that exterior bedroom doggy door open and close just a few feet from her, and when there was no dog there and no dog that could have been there, and even heard it bark. She said the bark sounded like a small dog. She thought it was the puppy, but my girl that died had a bark that sounded the same way. I'm really at a loss for what to think. I don't usually jump to the suspicion of ghosts, especially for animals, but I don't know how to explain these two strange occurrences. We've lived in this house for 12 years and nothing like this has ever happened. And within a few months of my girl's death, we had 2 strange unexplainable encounters. If my event in my study never happened, I would have just kept assuming that my wife dreamed the first one, but she was insistent that it wasn't a dream, and now that I've had my own encounter, I believe she might be right. There is literally no way that the dog door could have opened in my study all on its own. Something had to push it open. But all the dogs were accounted for, the 2 in my lap, the rest in the bedroom. No dog or anything else in the house. I don't know what to think about this. I keep trying to find some logical explanation for it, but I'm not coming up with one. And again, anything weird like the air conditioner kicking on and having a suction start in the house or anything like that can't possibly have caused it because, again, we've lived here for 12 years, and it has never done anything like that before or since. I'm at a loss for what it could be, if not her ghost. Our 12th story comes from Glittering Cat on Reddit. Hey guys, a few weeks ago, mid-late September or early October, I woke up because my foot felt really weird and I saw something at the foot of my bed bent over as it held my big toe. I fell asleep right after, but it freaked me out pretty bad. No one was in my room and it was about 4 a.m. or so. It looked like a Michelin Man, but about 5'5", 5'7", and had a dome-shaped helmet with tubes in the back that led to the back of a suit. I'm not sure if I've posted under the right flare here, but this has really upset me for a while, and I haven't seen it again or felt anything like that since I've been praying. I'm a Christian, rebuking the devil and anything else not made in the Lord's image. It's like 12:12 p.m. right now, but I can draw what I saw to the best of my ability and post it tomorrow if anyone is interested. Bonus. About 5 years ago, my dad and I were driving down a gravel road to pick my big brother up from work, and as we turned a corner, I saw what looked like a child-sized, 2 to 3 foot tall stick bug run behind a fire hydrant, and I haven't seen anything else like that since. Our 13th story comes from Company Pizza on Reddit. I manage a venue that used to be a Roman Catholic church and was then abandoned and used as a flophouse for many years. I am frequently in that building alone late at night by myself, closing up after shows and club nights. Several strange things have happened to me there. I was really busy setting up for an event, and I was walking along the mezzanine area toward a room that everyone had told me was haunted, and while I love ghost stories, I don't really believe in the supernatural on a fundamental level. The last thing on my mind at this time was spooky stuff. I was en route from one area to another, on a mission to do some logistical task or another. I paused at the railing, and suddenly I felt the sensation of being grabbed hand around the ankle, as though from below, which made no sense as it was a 25-foot drop to the main floor. I leapt backwards and started shaking my leg, and I looked everywhere but saw nothing. I was taking a meeting in broad daylight with a collaborator. We were sitting on a plush couch in the middle of the space, enjoying our conversation about a potential series of events that we could do. Because it was a business meeting, I left one cushion of space between him and myself on the couch. Suddenly, mid-sentence, I felt the distinct sensation of someone walking up to us and then sitting directly between us. We both paused and just stared at the cushion, which was moving. There was an impression as though someone had sat down, and there was a palpable energy of tension in the air. It felt for all the world as though an invisible person was sitting right there. We sat frozen in silence for about 30 seconds, which is actually a long time in the middle of a business meeting, just staring at the cushion, until I finally waved my arms through the space in exasperation and laughed. We were both confused and shaken and ended that meeting pretty quickly. I had to supervise a group that was rehearsing in the space. I was hungover and got in the morning, led in the group, and then went upstairs into a secluded area to take a nap on the couch and wait out my shift. Mid-nap, I woke up suddenly and heard someone slowly descending the stairs from the bell tower. I froze and kept my eyes closed, thinking it was someone from the rehearsing group and I just wanted them to go away. The footsteps drew closer, and I heard what sounded like a man muttering to himself under his breath as he leaned over me and grasped my hip hard. He squeezed it until it hurt, and I let out a yell and opened my eyes, but there was nobody there. Probably just a case of sleep paralysis, but very odd. I had never had a case of sleep paralysis before. There were multiple instances of seeing figures in the mirror, hearing doors slam, etc., people calling my name from distant corners while I'm there, all by myself. The custodian once told me that she refuses to clean at night anymore since she heard someone quietly praying in the confessional at 3 a.m. in the morning. Everyone likes to claim that it's the ghosts of all these Irish Catholic priests and their parishioners. But in my opinion, the many years the church sat empty and desolate as a last resort shelter for drug addicts and prostitutes is more likely the window of time where people would have died desperate, lost, and in pain. Our 14th story comes from Prisoner of Schnazkaban on Reddit. I was a teenager with a group of friends. I was around 17, I think. I'm 33 now. Someone suggested that we use the Ouija board that they just bought, but nobody wanted to play with it at their house. So we drove to a model house that was still under construction and played in their garage. Living in a small tourist town as locals with nothing to do, we got into a lot of trouble all the time. I grew up in a very abusive environment and I was always sensitive to things. I could hear and see things as a kid. My intuition was always insanely strong and I wasn't afraid of ghosts or spirits. I had an NDE at 3. I believe in God and cried out to him often as a child. I wasn't scared because I felt like he would protect me, so I offered to be the medium. This was my first time using a board or trying my hand at contacting spirits. We asked some generic questions. I honestly can't remember all of them. The planchette kept moving in circles and kept trying to give us warnings. Words like careful, danger, leave. One of my friends asked who or what the warning was for, and it spelled out, you. She asked what was so dangerous, and it spelled out, demon. I looked up from the board after that. Around us, we saw multiple shadow people sitting in the corners of the room surrounding us. I had a feeling that it was going to go after my friend in particular, so I told her that she should probably leave the garage. She said no, she was fine, but at that moment when I looked at her, one of the shadows had its arms around her and her neck. I yelled at her to leave immediately, and she started coughing, got up, and ran outside. I told everyone that we need to pack it up. We didn't end it, we just grabbed the board and left. So, something followed me and my friend back to our houses. Whatever followed me back started up poltergeist activity in my house. I had mine cleansed and we prayed over it. She was also being haunted, but her parents didn't believe in anything supernatural and refused to cleanse, so I suggested that we open the board and direct everything back where it came from to tell it goodbye. After that session, a friend asked if he could have the board, and I said sure, but make sure you end the session and explained how to do it. Of course, he did not, got freaked out, and tried to burn the board, but it wouldn't burn, so he says. He tossed it in the garbage. I didn't hear much from him after that. All of the rest of us were eventually fine, but I, personally, will never touch a Ouija board again. Our 15th story comes from Soel Sihora on Reddit. About 10 years ago, I got an invitation to attend my cousin's dinner party. I had never seen my cousin before and only spoke to him on the phone. I was surprised that his family actually unexpectedly invited me after all of these years. The invitation had an uncharted address that the GPS was unfamiliar with. I used a physical map and pinned its location. As I'm driving, I tend to notice how far I've ventured from civilization. Trees after trees, farms after farms. Where the heck am I going? I thought to myself. I finally found a similar address that I thought might be it. Approaching the house, I noticed how dull and dreary it looks. It's completely engulfed with leaves and branches. This can't be it, I said to myself. As soon as I entered the rocky driveway, my aunt and uncle came out to greet me. They seemed excited and welcoming. Walking into the house, I asked where my cousin was. Answering immediately, they said, he went to run a few errands. He should be back later. We spent the whole couple of hours talking about my mother and the family. My aunt made delicious homemade pot roast that I finished off in minutes. After dinner, we played an enduring game of Uno. It was surprisingly fun and competitive. After we finished Uno, it was almost dark and still no sign of my cousin. Regardless, I had to leave. It was almost dark and I would have trouble getting out of this dreadful place. My GPS was ineffective, so I asked my aunt and uncle the most efficient way to get onto the highway, and they gave me a very puzzled look. I thought you were staying the night. I told them I couldn't because I had to work tomorrow and I couldn't afford to miss another day. It's much better if you leave tomorrow morning. Trust me, you'll get lost. I shrugged it off and told them not to worry. I'm a very adept navigator. I could get out of the Sahara Desert. Looking aggravated, they strongly advised me to stay the night, for my own sake. At this point, they were getting angry, which scared me a bit. So I sighed, said, fine, I'll stay the night, but I do have to get up early for work. Both of them seemed strangely ecstatic that I was staying the night. As soon as they went to go get my bedsheets and pillows, I ran out the door and got in my car. I very hastily pulled out of the driveway. It took me a while, but I found my way out of that depressing place. I got home an hour later than I expected. It was 11 o'clock and I didn't want to wake my parents up. Climbing the fence and entering the back door, I noticed that the kitchen lights were still on. As soon as I took my first step in the house, I see my mom sitting there looking very impatient. "Where were you?" she asked. "I was at Aunt Deborah's. You knew this." "Huh. Then why did she call saying that you never arrived?" Until this very day, I still have no idea who I actually visited. Our 16th story comes from AddLocal3837 on Reddit. So this happened back in the year 2000 and is absolutely true. My first wife and I were separated and going through a divorce. At this point in time, I was living alone in the marital home. One night, I went out drinking with a few friends and staggered home around 2 a.m. The house was empty and, being a little worse for wear, I turned on the TV, plonked myself down in an armchair, and lit a cigarette. I'm not sure how much time had actually passed. I must have dozed off, but all of a sudden, a loud, booming voice shouted right into my ear. "Wake up!" I literally leapt from the chair in a dazed panic and began to look around the room, searching for the source of the voice. And that's when I felt the heat. Whilst I dozed in the armchair, the cigarette had slipped from my fingers and landed onto my chest, smoldering away at my sweater until it finally began to catch fire. I immediately patted out the small flames and tore the sweater off before frantically searching every room in the house for whoever had woken me up. But the house was empty. No one there but me. I eventually gave up the search and returned to the living room with my heart racing. The air was still filled with lingering smoke from my burnt clothing, and the extinguished cigarette lay on the floor next to my discarded sweater. I can still hear that booming voice to this day, and it still sends shivers down my spine. The way I describe it does not do it justice. The words seem to start in a low, drawn-out rumble and build in volume and power until reaching a terrifying crescendo. Nevertheless, I dread to think what might have happened if that voice hadn't shouted in my ear and woke me up. I had always considered myself a level-headed skeptic up to that point in my life, but now I'm more open-minded to the possibility that there are things in the world that we shall never understand. As a footnote, I would also like to mention that my father had passed away from cancer a few months before this happened. I'm not saying that he was the one who potentially saved my life, but it's worth noting. My dad had been a sergeant in the Army for many years before he died, and although he never raised his voice to me, I was informed that he was well respected and feared by his subordinates. Our 17th story comes from Cosmic Orphan 2020 on Reddit. Ever since I was a very young lad, I always pondered the existence of extraterrestrials, perhaps like all of us from a certain age. For me, growing up in the northeast of England, no older than 10, the existence of aliens, or any UFOs for that matter, was as mysterious and uncertain as the existence of God himself. Even the existence of other things like vampires, werewolves, Bigfoot, or the Loch Ness Monster, Nessie, as we Brits like to call her, were either just as likely or unlikely to exist. As that young, blonde-haired boy with pointy ears, the only aliens I knew of were from the movies that I'd watched. Whether it was War of the Worlds or Independence Day, these movies could only imagine the possibility of alien life and the consequences of that, without ever providing the real thing. But, by the year 2012 and barely scraping into secondary school, it would seem that I finally may have had my answer, whether I really accepted it or not. I have already recently shared both, yes, both, of my childhood UFO experiences before. But being a writer by trade, I thought I'd use my craft to revisit them, in the hope of fleshing out as much of these two mysteries as possible, so I can decisively decide if what I saw as a boy was indeed real or not. For the reader, it will also be up to you to decide if the events I witnessed happened as I saw them, or if my childhood imagination just got the best of me. Or if I'm really just full of it. Not that it's really worth much of a damn without any evidence, but the following of what I'm about to tell you did in fact happen, as I saw it, and to the best of my education. By the year 2012, I had been growing up in the East Riding of Yorkshire for the past 7 years, in an average-sized but oddly named port town of Goole. This town was of no particular interest, except perhaps for its two landmarks, two rather tall water towers, humorously named the Salt and Pepper Pots. Settled beside a tributary river, Goole was sparsely surrounded by patches of farmland and large crop fields. Perhaps the perfect setting for a UFO story, like the crop circle stories I know of from the United States. However, my first UFO experience wouldn't happen in some field on the outskirts of town, but inside the town itself. More precisely, it would happen no more than 100 meters from outside my bedroom window. Unfortunately, I don't remember the precise year when this first event took place, although I do know it happened in either 2011 or 2012. Therefore, I was either in my final year of primary school or my nerve-wracking first year of secondary. Regardless, I would have been around 11 years old. As a child, and even through my teens, I was always a bad sleeper, either getting no sleep at all or waking up in the very early hours of the morning. It was on one of these early mornings that I woke up to my silent, pitch-black bedroom, with everyone else in my house fast asleep. Not having an alarm clock or a phone to tell the time, I wondered what time of night it was, perhaps to know how much more sleep I could get. As I said, this was all a very regular occurrence for me, as was peeking my head through the curtain next to my bedside to see if the sky was still dark. By looking out from my bedroom window, I would have seen my 20-meter-long garden, which I regularly played football on, as well as the neighboring house on the other side of my back garden fence. But what I saw then, in the short distance over the roof of this particular neighboring house, would be a complete first. What I saw, flying, gliding, or simply just moving, 100 meters or less away from my bedroom window, was what I can only describe as a flying saucer-shaped like object. In the past, I described this object as the most stereotypical flying saucer shape you could ever see or imagine. The night was too dark to see its color, but I remember it making a distinctive humming noise as it moved over the town beneath it. But how I knew this object was saucer-shaped was because as it moved, or indeed hummed, a single row of small, bright lights moved around and around. At that age, if I imagined a flying saucer, I would have pictured a particularly large craft. But this object seemed no larger than a car or a small van. The speed at which this thing moved was not particularly fast or slow, but fast enough so that what I was seeing was gone in the next 5 to 10 seconds. Not knowing if what I had just seen was in fact real or just a dream, I pinched and slapped myself, hard enough to wake up almost anyone. But I was awake, and as you can imagine, I was in disbelief. If any one thing, paranormal or otherwise, that you didn't already know or believe in just appeared to you, confirming absolute proof, whether it was God or Jesus Christ, a heaven or a hell, even ghosts and yes, aliens, I think anyone would have had the very same first reaction. This can't be real. I must be dreaming. Do I need to question the meaning and my own understanding of life? That was the reaction I remember having, rational in the face of the unbelievable. If you were to ask me what I did next, having witnessed such an extraordinary and incomprehensible sight, you'd be surprised to learn that what I did was simply lay back down on my pillow and eventually fall back to sleep. You'd probably be surprised, but that's what I did. The very next day, with the event of last night still fresh in my mind, I found my mum putting laundry away in her and my dad's bedroom. Feeling comfortable enough to tell my mum almost anything, even which girls at school I fancied, I told her exactly what I saw the night before. Like any parent would, having been told a fictitious-sounding story by your young child, my mom showed no indication of surprise or even shock, instead responding in the lines of, "Oh, wow," and "Oh, really?" as she carried on folding the laundry on the bed. I asked her if she believed me, and she said that she sure did, but even before I confessed to her what I saw, I knew she wouldn't. Maybe I just needed to get what I saw that night instantly off my chest, and telling my mom would have been the best way to do it. Without facing ridicule from my friends, of course, being laughed at by my sister, or just simply being ignored by my dad. As unbelievable as this story that I told my mom was, I knew that what I saw that night was real, and I think most people on this planet know when they are dreaming and when they are not, and I just knew that I wasn't. If this was the case, then what I saw from my bedroom window that night was indeed a flying saucer, a UFO. It may then come as a surprise to whomever is reading this, as it did for me, to learn that despite bearing witness to what appeared to be an unforgettable UFO experience, I had almost completely forgotten about what happened that night, not fully recollecting what I saw until the latter part of the year. Was I in denial at what I just saw? Did my mind choose to just repress the memory of it? When I first wrote of this experience only recently, an online user speculated just as much as me, that my young brain couldn't comprehend what I had seen and therefore repressed the whole experience. But, like I have already said, this would not be my only potential UFO encounter. And the next time, thankfully, I wouldn't be alone. During the summer of 2012, and having just graduated primary school, my 6 friends and I ventured almost every day to the exact same place along the outskirts of town. We had found a field with a small adjoining wooded area, and very quickly, this area became our brand new den, where we spent most days climbing trees or playing hide and seek. At the very end of our den was a 4-feet wide dike, separating the field we played in from the town's rugby club that was also on the outskirts of town. The reason I bring up this dike is because my friends and I, upon discovering it, would also spend a lot of our time there in the summer. We enjoyed playing this juvenile game where one of us had to leap over the embankment on the other side, or cross via a narrow wooden plank that we had found to make a bridge. Being the attention seeker that I was at that age, I was always willing to jump up and over to the other side. In fact, I was the best. Anyone else who tried mostly ended up with 1 foot in less than sanitary water. Several months later, however, and nearly halfway through our first year of secondary school, our tradition of jumping dikes and field hide-and-seek had sadly become far less frequent with the ongoing school year. That was, until one afternoon. Or maybe it was evening. I don't remember. My friends and I ventured back to our den in the nearby dike, crossing over and entering behind the grounds of the rugby club. These grounds consisted of 2 large rugby fields and a smaller patch of grass by the side, and this is where the dike had led us. What the 5 or 6 of us were doing there, I'm not quite sure. We sometimes did use the grounds to play tag hide and seek, or other times we just explored. But what I remember next from that afternoon/evening, in whichever autumn month it might have been, was we caught sight of something flying in the not-too-distant sky, and heading directly our way. At first, we must have thought that it was nothing more than an airplane or Royal Air Force craft, as our town had them passing the sky on a regular basis. The closer this thing got, however, the more it started to look like something else. Something none of us had probably ever seen before. It started to look like what our juvenile, imaginative minds could only interpret as an alien spacecraft of some kind. So much so that one of my friends said something in the lines of, "Is that a UFO?" As though speaking the minds of all of us. Whatever this thing was, it was still coming our way and was flying curiously low. As close as it was now, I think we were all waiting for this craft to visually clarify for us that it was some kind of plane. But what I can still remember vividly is this thing being directly over our heads. And my next thought while looking up at it was, "That is a UFO! An alien spaceship!" Before any other thought could enter my mind, whether it be one in awe, dread, or panic, I hear one of my friends a meter or 2 behind me shout, "Crap!" By the time I look behind me, all I see is every one of my friends running away toward the embankment of the dike, as though running for their lives. If I recall, it was just me and my friend George that didn't. I'm sure that I thought of running too, but I must have been in such awe or disbelief at what I was seeing, and even if I did run, I thought it was sure to abduct me. Whether I ran or stood right where I was, I felt convinced that there was nothing that I could really do. If it was going to take me, it would. When I turn away from my friends to look back up at what I see to be an alien craft, what I instead see is some kind of low-flying military jet, turned slightly away from us and now flying off. My friends also must have noticed that it was just a military jet, as they had stopped running and now slowly joined back up with the rest of the group, realizing that there was really nothing to be afraid of anymore. Although my memory of the following conversation is hazy, we did discuss what we had just seen, with every one of us indeed thinking that it was a UFO at first, only to then realize that it was a military jet. I don't remember the conversation going any further from there, or what we even did afterwards for that matter. We probably just went back into town and played football at the park. However, something that I discreetly remember to this day is that in the next 2 years that I still knew them, before packing up my things and moving abroad with my family, is that not a single one of us ever talked about that experience again, not even for a laugh. There was no, "Remember when we all thought that we saw a UFO, but it was really just a plane?" I did drift away from most of these friends by the following year, and we were all in separate classes in school and played for rival football teams, so perhaps they did talk about the experience, just without me there. In my last year before moving abroad, however, I did reacquaint myself with my best friend Kai, who was there that day at the rugby club. We had drama class together that year, and it was in these lessons that we learned all about these terrifying urban legends, in which the class afterwards had to dramatically perform them. It was also from these lessons that Kai and myself became obsessed with urban legends, so much so that we would watch scary YouTube videos about them. But in that same year, enjoying to be scared together, not once, to my recollection, did either one of us bring up that experience at the rugby club. Not once. Kai was one of my friends I saw run away that day, so he was obviously scared by that craft as well. But I never brought it up either. In fact, I think I almost forgot about the experience altogether. Just like my first experience a year prior to it. But what's even crazier to me is that I seem to forget about both of these experiences, regardless of what they were, for the next 10 years. If you're wondering why I even bother talking about this second experience, even though it only turned out to be a military jet, it's because since recollecting my first experience recently and becoming acquainted with UFO lore and history, some things about that day at the rugby club just don't seem to add up to me. Number 1. If this was an RAF jet, then it was flying dangerously low, potentially 100 to 160 feet above us. From what I've researched, RAF jets can fly as low as about 100 feet, but when it comes to populated areas containing vehicles and civilians, then it can go no lower than 500 feet. If this was a jet, it may not have even seen my friends and I, but it was still flying around in a populated town. Number 2, I was 100% convinced that this craft flying over me was an alien craft. 100 feet or so above me, and that is what I believed I was seeing. It was only when I looked at my friends running away and then back again that it somehow became a military jet. Number 3, and perhaps the most confusing aspect of this experience, is that the RAF jet, from my recollection, made barely any noise. From what I've read, RAF jets at only 25 meters after takeoff are so loud that it can rupture your eardrums. Like I said, this jet was no more than 160 feet above us, and yet I could still hear my friend cuss the S word right behind me. Having recently fallen down the UFO rabbit hole in the past year, I did come across one video, whether real or a hoax, of a spinning, bright glowing light in the clear day sky that slowly morphed into a standard airliner. Although in the video, the transition took the better part of a minute, I then wondered if the craft that I saw that day could possibly have done the same thing. However, when I previously shared my experiences online, only several months ago, one person rationally suggested that the craft I saw could have fact been the Avro Vulcan XH558, which was active in 2012 and based at Doncaster Sheffield Airport, not that far from Goole. The Avro Vulcan is indeed a very odd-looking military craft, with wings resembling something like you would see out of Star Trek. Hey, maybe that's why it was called the Avro Vulcan. From what I remember, in the few seconds that I fully believed this thing flying over me to be a UFO, it didn't strike me as flying saucer-shaped, not like the one that I had seen a year before. Regardless, whatever this craft was, it definitely struck me as an alien craft at first. And maybe what I thought that I was seeing was a different kind of alien craft. Or maybe it really was just a military jet, an oddly shaped one at that. If you were to ask me now, in the year 2024, if what I saw in 2012 was either a UFO or simply an RAF jet, for the sake of rationality, I would say that it was just a jet, whose strange appearance merely confused a group of 12-year-old boys. However, to conclude the speculation of this second experience, I will leave you with this. Not long after posting of my experiences, an online user advised me to share my story with a specific UFO investigator, who particularly focuses on UFO activity in the Yorkshire area. Feeling in need of answers, I emailed this very same investigator. Intrigued by my story, he requested a conversation over the phone with me, and after relaying this second experience with him, highlighting how this jet was supposedly flying dangerously low without producing much sound at all, he simply said to me, "That wasn't a military craft." If you were to also ask me whether I believe in aliens, I would say that I do. Not because of what I saw. I still don't know if what I saw was real. I do believe in aliens, or whatever they are. There are countless theories. Simply because since I first fell down this UFO rabbit hole, learning of the experiences of many others, The existence of extraterrestrials no longer appears irrational to me. After all, can we really be the only intelligent beings to exist in this universe? The answer is, I don't know. But what I do know is that for me, like it will be for countless others, the truth is still out there, somewhere. Maybe even right here on our very own planet. Ooh, that was a long one. This is our next story. Our 18th story comes from 5BK Rail on Reddit. The weekend of 10/11/24, my friends and I set out for a camping trip in Lake Kegonsa State Park, located in Stoughton, Wisconsin. While finishing up some geocaching on a hiking trail near the outhouses, we encountered something/someone strange. You can enter the trail after crossing the path of another trail that enters the forest. The trail that we were on circled a prairie that laid in the middle of the trail and was surrounded by forest. The sun was low in the sky. It had to have been roughly 6 p.m. The sun was just above the tree line as we started our hike. As we were at our last geocache of the night, the sun had just gone behind the tree line as it was beginning to get dark. But we could still see without the assistance of flashlights. The forest went silent. No more sounds of bugs around us or birds that have been active all day. It approached us with a whistle, a bone-chilling whistle. Our entire group went silent, and no one said a word, until we heard a second whistle. The second whistle was more broken up than the first, and in the slightly tipsy state that I was in, I thought that it had to be a human whistle, as it wasn't perfect. To that, I responded with a pretty stern, "Hello?" hoping for an explanation as to why our group got whistled at twice. "I thought you were dogs," a voice said as it rounded the trail towards up. As he passed our group, I noticed that I could not make out a face on this person, but chalked it up to nerves and being distracted. As a group, we agreed that while it was a strange encounter, we shouldn't panic, but took it as a sign to get off the trail. And this is where it gets even more weird. All 4 of us in that group kept our eyes peeled for anything as we made our way back to the car. When suddenly, this creature, calling it a creature as it surely was not human, suddenly appeared at the edge of the trail closest to the woods, staring blankly to the field in front of it that would have been to our right. And in the flattest, driest tone, it said, "Who's that guy?" Everyone in our group kept walking as I answered, "The same guy from earlier?" as I assumed it was talking about my boyfriend who was behind the group. We had never been so silent on the walk back to the car, checking behind our shoulders and our surroundings constantly. We made it back to our campsite where we decided due to the time of day it would be best to wait to pack up until morning. While we were debriefing our experience, I told my friends how in neither encounter I could not make out a face. Being a female hiker, I make a point to gather some facial features of anyone I cross on the trail, just in case. No one in our group could identify a face, and in our own ways we described how the face on this thing was not a human face. It seemed to almost have a blurred effect over what should have been a human face. All of us had seen the same thing. You could tell where eyes, nose, and mouth should have been, but there were none on this creature. Being that it whistled and was unidentifiable, we were convinced to have encountered a Skinwalker. They just are not typically relevant in that area of Wisconsin. It was a long night at that campsite with the impending feeling of being watched. I'm spiritually inclined, and I feel like I took the necessary steps of protecting our campsite for a secured night's sleep. But I've had strange encounters since, and I'm willing to explain those encounters if someone asks. But in regards to that one, any ideas? Our 19th story comes from That Guy Colin on Reddit. Hey everybody. I was randomly suggested this subreddit by a Reddit notification, and after reading a couple posts and realizing that there was a popular shadow person tag here, I thought that I'd share my own experience from when I was a child with the entity that I've called Shadow Girl as long as I can remember. It should be said that I'm 19 now, and all 3 of these events that I'm about to describe happened when I was pretty young, from about 6 to 8. When I was young and my parents were still married, it was me, my 1 older brother, and my 2 younger sisters, and my parents, obviously. My dad is in a very high post-secondary educational position, which he got when we were very young in Winnipeg, where I still live now. As he was in the process of getting this position, we lived half of the time in Winnipeg as we looked for a place to live there, and half the time in a house across the U.S. border in Pembina. We eventually got a house in Winnipeg, and we slowly moved into that house from the Pembina house over a short period of time. I don't remember exactly how long, but it isn't that important. The first encounter. I was in the 2nd grade when I saw her at our newer house. I had come home from school and very soon after decided that I wanted to play Minecraft on our family tablet, which was kept charging in my parents' room on the 2nd floor of our house. I ran up our curved staircase and turned right immediately through the doorway of my parents' room. As I entered and stood faced to my parents' bed, the tablet directly across the room from the foot of the bed, I saw her. I stood completely in shock. The pitch-black silhouette of a young girl in a puffy dress was sitting on the foot of my parents' bed, staring straight forward at the wall ahead of her. I didn't know what to do, but I felt paralyzed. As I watched her, she ever so slowly turned her head to look at me with these saucer-like white eyes. Just an absence of the black on her face, where instead there was white. That's what her eyes looked like. I slowly leaned out of my parents' doorway after a couple seconds of eye contact and yelled downstairs, "Dad? Dad?" But nothing back. And so as I peeked back into the room, she was gone. Just gone. I was afraid, and so I stepped carefully, but still retrieved the tablet and scurried downstairs as if something was nipping at my ankles. Pembina is a small town now. It was even smaller when I was young. In our house, which we called the Little House or the Pembina House, there was a very creepy basement, a main floor, and a 2nd floor. My brother and I shared a room on the 2nd floor, as did my sisters, and my parents slept in a room on the main floor. The second encounter. I don't remember the context for why I was going to my room or anything, or how far apart this was from the first encounter, but I rounded a corner up to enter the stairwell and, I remember distinctly, I was looking at my feet on just the first 2 steps. I looked up the stairs and froze as I saw her at the top of the stairs, again just staring at me. I don't know what had gotten into me at this time, but I was annoyed enough at this thing just for showing up that I went up the stairs at a full sprint to try to catch her. I watched her as her whole body just turned, without lifting her legs, and walked so slowly around the corner and up the stairs which led to the 2nd floor, just past the corner. I made it to the top, and, surprise, surprise, she was nowhere. I looked in every room upstairs, and nothing. Disappeared again. The last encounter. This happened at our Pembina house. I was a very outdoorsy kid and loved catching bugs and collecting rocks and building forts and everything like that. It was awesome. In our backyard, I had caught a butterfly with a glass from our kitchen and decided that the best place to store it was in my sister's closet, under a glass, with a single branch. My logic was that it would have been A, safe, and 2, not found or stolen by anyone since my sisters didn't really use their closet. I slid a paper under the glass to seal the butterfly in, and I remember that the paper had a drawing on it. I had drew the Iron Robot from an animated kids movie of the same name. Very crudely drawn, but I do remember that one fun detail. Anyways, the next day I went back, up the stairs to the 2nd floor, into my sister's closet, and, to my surprise, discovered a very dead butterfly. I was, of course, very sad, and looked out my sister's window at that moment, and immediately caught her gaze. She was standing far out into our yard, very far, but she was looking up at me through the window. I put down the butterfly and slowly walked to the window, not breaking eye contact. After about a minute of her staring, she once again turned without moving her legs and almost floated off to the side, out of view behind a hedge. To this day, I have no explanation further than her being a shadow person, and I was first introduced to that revelation in the 6th grade when I was reading a Haunted Canada book which had a story detailing a shadow person. I hope people don't think that I'm just making things up, as I tried to include every detail that I could remember. To this day, I'm still scared that she's watching me sometimes. But it's just paranoia, I'm sure, since I haven't seen her since then. Our final and 20th story comes from All Our Ip on Reddit. I am telling this story secondhand on the behalf of the person who experienced it. I was told this story in 2012 and it has always stuck with me. Now that I have recently discovered this subreddit, I wanted to share this encounter with others. The gentleman who imparted this story to me did so after a lengthy evening of enjoying beers at the fire pit in the backyard of his at the time Redding, California home. He recounted the time when he was a teenager living in a nearby town called Red Bluff. He had a girlfriend who lived within walking distance of his home, and he used to sneak out and head to her house in the middle of the night. He recalled how the road he would walk to her place spanned a rural distance before reaching her neighborhood. On one occasion, he was making his way back home in the early morning after visiting his girlfriend. It was still very much nighttime as he was walking along the road. At this particular section, the road passed through the long, dark section of rural span, only to be momentarily lit by the infrequent passing of car headlights. It was dark and quiet as he walked when he noticed the sound of what must have been footsteps following behind him. He was immediately made uncomfortable. It was not uncommon for drugged derelicts and transients to be wandering at this time of night in this area. These would be the characters that you would certainly not want anything to do with at this time of night, or at this location. He increased his pace, yet the footsteps seemed to remain just as assuredly behind him as before. His discomfort began to elevate to panic. Suddenly a car was heading towards him on the desolate road. He knew as the headlights passed, he would have a chance to see who was following him. The moment came and he turned to see what this crackhead wandering in the night might look like, but what he saw looked like nothing of the sort. He explained to me what he could only describe as what looked like a large Great Dane walking upright on its hind legs. I believed he did say that it looked like the creature had a snout. He said that the skin looked gray, pale, and hairless, and it was very skinny to the point where you could see its skeleton underneath. The most memorable detail that he kept recalling, though, was that the rib cage protruded just like that of a Great Dane. The rest of the story is short. What he saw terrified him, and he started sprinting and didn't stop until he reached the nearest lit area that he could find, which was a random parking lot. He stood there, terrified, until the sun came up, walked the rest of the way home, and never went down that road at night again.
As the night gets longer and the darkness creeps in, with the eerie silence broken only by whispering wind, come gather round the fire, the flickering flames, and hear the tales of the spooky and the strange. A chill up your back, a shiver up your spine. You'll be haunted by the things that you find. Legends will unfold and stories will be told at the Scaredy Campfire, for only